Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terry Tennant, CEO of SAIF. It's good to have you with us. And I'm delighted to welcome Declan Maguire, who is currently the SAIF Scotland President and the immediate past President of National SAIF, as well as a Director of Anderson Maguire in Glasgow. Welcome, Dec. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Terry. It's good to be here, and I'm delighted we have our presentation showing on the screen as well. A couple of technical hitches there, but we're finally there. I think probably just to kick off and give some context to this report, I assume that most members would be familiar. This is the second year that we have produce report, and our intention is to keep on going, Terry. But I think that this journey started probably 3 years ago. Is that right?
It did, when we were getting more and more frustrated with Sun Life and the inaccuracies of their report, and not taking in direct cremation figures and accurate costs. And you're our resident research fellow in SAIF, and it's really important that we understand things. So I'm going to hand over to you. For our members, if you want to put any questions in the chat box, we'll pick that up at the end of the presentation. Thank you, Dick.
Fantastic. Thank you, Terry. So good afternoon, everyone. And today we are looking at what is the real average cost of a funeral in the UK in 2025. I'm going to give some context to this report and just explain the background a little bit more. One of the biggest challenges that we have every single year is when the Sun Life Cost of Dying report comes out, and the press pick up on it. It's a very straightforward report. It's easy to read, and often they don't read it. They just pick up the highlights, and that's often in a press release from Sun Life. And the story is always the same. The funeral costs, the price of dying, how much it's increased year on year. Part of our challenge has always been that the Sun Life report itself, we've always felt was inaccurate, or the methodology behind it wasn't quite right. And I'm going to just touch on some of those points right now, because we don't just say this for the sake of saying it. We do our research. We try to understand exactly how they go about producing a report. And it's been, I think, over 20 years now that report has been released. Let's not forget Sun Life do sell over 50 insurance plans as well. And here's what's wrong with this report. So the methodology was skewed. It delivered a higher average price than the market reality. And there were a number of reasons for that. And more recently, there's been, with the introduction or the increase in direct cremation in the funeral market, we're seeing that has been skewed further. So the makeup of an average funeral included a mid-range coffin, doctor's fees, and a limousine. Well, we know that is not an average funeral, and yet that was standard in their makeup of the cost of a funeral. And when they surveyed funeral directors, that's exactly what they asked for. And so what they got back was, it was an average, but it wasn't the average of a funeral in the UK. The other thing that became really interesting was that direct cremations were not included in the total average results. So essentially anywhere from, and it depends whose market research you read, but anywhere from 15 to say 18.5% of funerals in the UK, the lowest cost funerals in the UK, were not included in that average cost. So the actual average itself was far off reality. So we decided that it was time for us to work with a funeral solution expert. They do an incredible amount of research on a wide range of topics, including funeral plans, consumer intentions, and obviously now we've been working with them for the past 2 years. We're moving into our third year's report and looking at a very, very extensive amount of research, not only with the consumer, but also within our membership and also the wider funeral sector as well. And you can just see a copy of the last year's report. That's a copy of this year's report. They're both available on the SAIF website, but also within the SAIF Digital Facebook group. If you're not in that group yet, it is a closed group. So when you join, you have to fill in a couple of questions. If you're not in there, please go in there. This is where we release a lot of exclusive content for SAIF members, but we also give you early previews as well to a lot of other, not just this research, but there's some other research we do with, say, for example, Obitus, one of our partners, and it's incredibly insightful, and there'll be more research being released in the coming weeks and months ahead. So Year two, this is a 12-month process, so we've already started work on next year's report, and that includes a lot of surveying in the public and understanding where we're going and what their intentions are and their preferences are for funerals. But we also survey all the SAIF members. Our return on those surveys is about 1 in 5, which is incredibly high, given that it's not a small, quick 60-second survey. There's quite a bit of information that we ask for, and we're very, very grateful to those members for taking the time to fill in those surveys and give us the context we require in order to produce the report. The other thing I'll note as well is it's not just any 200 plus SAIF members. We use exactly the same distribution methodology that Sun Life use. And the reason for that is that we want to make sure that our results are not skewed in any way by geography. We always insist that we work by television regions, and we've got a minimum amount of funeral directors in each region, and that is exactly how Sun Life do it. And in total, there've been over 6,000 UK adult surveys. That is not a small amount at all. That's actually quite big for a consumer survey, and so it means that we've got a very robust set of data to work from, and not only for what we produce in the report, but also some things we can work on after it's been published and start to drill down deeper into user profiles and understand what kind of groups make decisions and for what reasons. And in Leicester, just a couple of weeks ago, we were able to talk about direct cremations in a much more detailed way that we haven't been before, and I'm delighted to say that we'll share that towards the end of today's presentation. So I want to get into some of the charts and graphs that we've extracted from the report. I've picked my favourites. There are others, and I would encourage you to read this report. Again, it's on the SAIF website in the members area. It's also available in the SAIF digital Facebook group. So the first one I'm going to look at is actually from the Sun Life cost of dying report. It's one of the few charts that we're okay with, even though we think it's a little bit high. This is looking at the type of funeral. And I am trying to be able to see the bottom of my presentation, which I'm struggling to do. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. Okay, I can see it now. That's good. So as we look back to 2019, and if you look at direct cremation, and we're all familiar with this, that direct cremation has increased significantly from 3% to 14% between 2019 and 2020. COVID was a huge factor in that, but sustaining that and perhaps growing it has been obviously the likes of pure cremation with significant TV and online budgets. That has grown to 18%, and looking to 23-24, it's being kind of positioned round about the 20% mark. There's a little bit of dispute on this. It depends who you talk to about it. This is a survey. There are other pieces of data that bring it down a little bit. Our position on this is that it sits somewhere between the kind of 15.8% and the 17.3% mark. One of the challenges that we do have is that the recording of what is a direct cremation is different depending upon who's doing the research. From our perspective, and this is just a personal thing, someone comes in and asks for a funeral with a direct cremation element to it, so there might still be a viewing, or there might still be some other kind of service attached to it. Do we record that as a direct cremation? Not really, no, because it's slightly different. So, but that's just our perspective on it. In terms of research, it's different. And then again, you've got crematoria as well. They have a different view on it. They don't know if there's been additional services with regard to that particular funeral. So they purely record it as a direct cremation. So it would be fairly accurate to say that it's probably in the late teens, but the reality of it from a funeral director's and an independent funeral director's perspective is that it doesn't necessarily mean that there's not been other services or there's been a wider amount of activity around that particular funeral. So this is onto our research now. This is about preferred funeral type, and I've highlighted throughout this presentation some of the more interesting kind of feedback that we've had. So question in this one's quite straightforward. Which funeral is the closest to the funeral you would choose for yourself if you had to? Now, we've not broken this down into any profiles. We did do that last year, and there's a really fascinating stat on generational changes. So moving from baby boomers, Generation X, Gen Y, and how their preferences change over time. that particular slide is in last year's report. It's also published in the SAIF Digital Group, and I would really encourage you all to have a look at that. That gives us a glimpse into the future. For this one, this is fairly straightforward. We can see here that the closest funeral that you would choose for yourself if you had to, traditional cremations at 20%, direct cremation or unattended, or an unattended direct cremation in any way, is at 19%. It's not changing too much. It looks like that's roughly where it's going to stay in the market for now. We also have a really interesting stat there at natural burial is at 10%. Now, a couple of things to consider here. This, when we survey, there's no price attached to this, so they are not aware of what the financial considerations are. And we know that funerals are becoming increasingly price sensitive. Not only that, not all of us have natural burial facilities within, a close proximity to our funeral homes, so it's not always an option. But it is really interesting to see, and as I made reference to last year's report, incoming generations, and that includes individuals who are considering their own funeral, but also key decision makers for someone else's funeral, like a mum or dad or a loved one, are increasingly considering environmental choices, and natural burial is definitely one that I think at some point, I think we looked at, I think it was Gen X, Gen Y, they were up to about 18% was the preference rate for those generations. So as much as it looks like it's far away, it's not really. They are now becoming the decision makers for funerals for individuals who've not given any intention, and we know the percentage is very, very high for that. So that is something to consider about your environmental choices and services that you provide. And as I said, last year's Education Day, if you don't have a natural burial facility nearby you, maybe it's time to start having a conversation with other funeral directors and other service providers in your area. So this one is chart 4 in the report. It's a preference for funeral arranger. We like to understand a great deal more about why people choose the different types of funeral service providers that they do. And when I say that, we look at independent funeral directors, locally based. We look at national companies, and we also look at online companies as well. Something else is an option in there, and typically speaking, that seems to have fallen, and again this is drawn from last year's research, that might be a celebrant or a local religious representative. They might want them involved in helping your family arrange that funeral. So that's a slight skew at the end, but it is very interesting to note that it does exist. So you can see here, and focusing on local independent funeral directors for traditional cremation, 58% of those surveyed would prefer to use a local independent funeral director. 34% would say a local funeral director from one of the large national funeral companies. And interestingly, 6% for an online funeral company for traditional cremation, even though many of us know that that's not really an option. But that's not something we restrict in this particular survey. We let people say what they're thinking and what their preferences are without conditions. Again, natural burial is something that we talked about in the last slide. It is definitely on the increase as well. But 54%, there is no real surprise there at all. What we'll do is, and you can read this in the report, we'll go down to direct cremation unattended. Given how significant the presence is for online companies advertising this, and of course we're talking about direct pure cremation, independents are still preferred to 35%, and we are going to look into that a little bit later, just as to why that percentage is where it's at in terms of local service and trust. But we're also going to look at people, and one person in particular that doesn't really respond to some of the messaging that local independents share about the importance of keeping a service local. So not only do we ask who they'd like to arrange a funeral for them, but we also ask them why. Why would they go to someone and for what reason? So not really a huge surprise for us in terms of the research team, but value for money is at 32%. So that best describes why you would want to choose that arranger. You could often say that value for money has always probably been a consideration. It's probably not been said out as much as in kind of past research as being a key reason. Transparency, and in particular the CMA Order 2021 that requires us all to have pricing on the exterior, interior, and on our websites, has increased the conversation about value. What is really important is that value is a perception. If you take two costs side by side, and I think some of our members sometimes get confused for this, where they would say, well, they're £10 cheaper than me and I need to come down, I need to change. It depends on what you provide. If you have that dedicated one-on-one service, if you have a nice fleet of vehicles, if you have an excellent response time when a family gets in touch with you, value is down to people feeling like they got value for what they paid, not necessarily that it was just a certain amount versus a certain amount. And I think investing in your business and making sure that you meet those key metrics as to what families look for will increase the perception of your value against how much you charge for your service. The second, third, and fourth reasons is local. Local is important to a large percentage of people. They like to ensure they're giving business back, or they're contributing to businesses locally, even if it's a funeral where you might think it might not be a huge consideration. It actually is. And then you add in the personal service as well. People like to know who they're dealing with, or families like to have good references for people that they would trust to take care of this service. And that leans in again to the professionalism of the company itself, which is reflected in a wide range of aspects of what we do. But the top four, no huge surprises in there. But again, it is something to kind of focus on, that those are the top ones. And again, value for money is important, not to see it as in a monetary sense, but in a return for the investment the family has made for you to carry out that service for them. It's always important to look at what's positive, but also less positive attributes as well. And those are the things that we know we need to work on as independent funeral directors. Again, this is a national survey, so it's not necessarily saying it's you in your area, but it is reflecting what the public's view is of funeral directors. And a really, really interesting stat has been on this question, which is which of the following words would you use to describe local independent funeral directors versus an online provider? Now, one of probably the most unexpected pieces of data that we got out of this report this year and last year, and other surrounding research pieces that we're working on, has been about the simplicity that people are really seeking. And it's interesting to see that people described 25% of people thought that local independents were straightforward, and 27% of people thought that online providers were straightforward. Funerals aren't typically straightforward. There's paperwork to do, there's decisions to be made, some of them easier than others. It's not a particularly straightforward process, especially at a time when people are experiencing grief and there's a lot of stress around family and friends, and there's a lot going on. It has become absolutely clear that the simpler you can make the process, the better. And we all know that, but that's why we exist. We're here to take care of a lot of the details in and around the funeral and the main parts of care of the deceased and the family. What I would say is that has definitely prompted us to start to look at how can we make a funeral process even simpler, because at the moment it's seen that online and local are kind of neck and neck in its process, and we're certainly going to look at that. But I would encourage everyone to start to look at their own process as well, how you explain what the steps are to a family, how you might explain what embalming is, care of the deceased. How does that process take place? Is it in leaflets? Is it on your website? Are your staff trained to discuss it competently with families? It's definitely worth a kind of a review of how you do it and what you do. The other section I want to have a look at here is looking at remote. It's very interesting to see that people think of an online provider as remote. It's fairly obvious. I think these are things for us to lean into as what to reinforce the value of our services to our communities. Again, inflexible as well is another interesting one. Impersonal and poor service. If that is what the public is saying, if that's their fears of using online providers, then, and I don't see these being utilized as much in marketing for a lot of our members, it's time to have a look at maybe incorporating some of that into your marketing through your social media or other channels as well, to talk about the importance of how you can assist in those areas and you are there for them at the time of need. So This is probably another surprise, and that's the best part about being creative in terms of our approach to what we're trying to learn from the market. It's not just the same old thing. We do review our questions every single year, and we look at what came up last year, what changes have there been in the market, and what questions can we ask next. This is a fascinating one. So, travel distance from home to resting place. We were very curious. We noticed that a lot of independent funeral directors were starting to market, and with a really heavy focus on trying to get business back from online direct cremation providers. And in order to do that, it's really important to understand why those people made those choices. And there was an immediate thought, it was about cost. There was an element of simplicity in there, uncomplicated. There was lots of terms being thrown about, but we wanted to drill down a little bit further and understand, in terms of where the cremation would take place, because that is a big thrust of a lot of members marketing, is how important is that to that group that they're trying to bring back to their business. And the question is, quite simply, thinking about the funeral type you prefer, please consider, if you had to arrange this type of funeral, how far would you prefer the person who died to travel from where they lived to their final resting place? So essentially from the point of death to where the actual end part of the funeral, the disposal part of the funeral takes place. What's your preference for that? So 40% of people said, well, that should be within 5 miles. And that seems quite reasonable. I understand 5 miles, it makes a bit of sense. The next one was between 6 to 15 miles. That was 35% of people. Again, thinking about the demographics across the UK, that does make a bit of sense as well. 9% of people said between 16 to 50 miles. So it was much less important, and the distance wasn't really a main factor in their choice. What really got us excited, I think, to kind of research further was the 16 point, I think it was 16.3 or 16.5% of people who just didn't really care. It wasn't something important to them in any way, shape or form as to why or where that funerals take place. Its distance wasn't important. So we wanted to look into that a little bit more. But before I do, it's important to get some other context here as to how independents are doing it in the direct cremation space in the last 12 months. And I'm thinking in terms of the cost of a funeral, the price that we provide to the public. There was a gap, a rather large gap for some time, and direct cremation was coming in at a price point that was very, very hard to compete with. And thanks to the Diamond partnership with Westerly and SAIF, we were able to assist members in providing a much lower price point from the crematorium to ourselves, which made us much more competitive. However, more work needs to be done in there, because I'll touch on values-based purchase in a second, but there is an acceptable amount where an independent funeral director is more expensive than an online funeral director or an online direct cremation provider, and people would still prefer to go local. And that is anywhere between 260 to about £280 is roughly where that is, where if that's what the price difference is, they will go local over online. What we can see is that gap was fairly significant in last year's report, and was even more significant the year before, even though we didn't report it. What we've now seen is that online direct cremation providers have had an average of a 12.9% increase in the market. There's a lot of reasons for this. Essentially, direct cremation has been sitting in what we describe as a price war, where everybody is going to provide that service to gain market share, and with the hope of retaining families for the future. It doesn't always work that way. And what I would say about that is that because direct cremation, there's very few touch points with the family, so the ability of companies to retain them for any future business they might need is significantly lower than independent funeral directors, where you do have that face-to-face engagement. And we know that that level of engagement does make a difference, particularly when it comes to providing funerals. What is really good to see is that independents have actually decreased their price. Now, it might only be by 0.6%, but prices go up year on year. And with the cost of living challenges and many other factors, it was expected that that price should go up at least 3 to 5%. In fact, we are getting much more competitive in the space. So to see one go up by 12.9 and for us to just sit where we are, just reduce a little bit, is actually really, really good news for the independent sector. And we will see the effects of that, because as it gets closer and closer, and I believe the difference between pure cremation and the average cost of SAIF members is approaching that zone where people would choose a SAIF member over pure cremation, is very, very encouraging indeed. And that was something that we really reinforced in last year's report, is that in terms of your headline pricing, you need to think smarter. If you're going to give a price, make sure it's like for what Pure are offering, because Pure do have a lot of add-ons and a lot of independent members, and I will admit we do as well here. We would incorporate a lot of services that would not be automatically included with a Pure service, and that has been reflected. So it's very, very good news. And as I said here at the bottom, we are getting more price competitive, moving within an acceptable zone where values-based purchase applies. So people are, I suppose, happy to pay a local premium because they know that there's going to be that one-on-one service, that local person they can deal with. They know their name, and if they really want to, they can pop down and say hello and have a conversation about other options as well. So very good news, and hopefully that will continue. So as I said, 16.3, 16.5% of people really don't have a preference where the end part of the funeral, the disposal part of the funeral takes place. That in itself is an interesting percentage of people, because it also is very, very close to the percentage of people who will opt for a direct cremation. So we wanted to dig into this a little bit deeper and start to understand the actual profile of the people who responded to our survey in that way. If we can understand who they are, it helps us communicate with them, it helps us reach them, but also helps us understand the psychology behind that decision and what has changed in, we're talking about 5 years since everything has changed completely. Why was it not the case 5 years ago, but it is the case now? There are so many reasons for it, but we're going to meet Margaret. So Margaret is essentially the average profile of everyone who responded to the survey in that way. So Margaret is the pragmatic planner. She averages age at 67, so she's baby boomer generation. She tends to be female, and her income is 28,000. So she sits within the kind of low to medium of 21 to 41k bracket. She's typically based in Edinburgh. Now, I have to say that doesn't mean they're all based in Edinburgh. What that means is the highest percentage of people who are looking at this are based there, and generally around the country it gravitates towards that region. But marital status is widowed, and children, 2 adult children. They've moved away, as is more commonly the case, and they're living in different cities. So the legacy of her presence in our home has changed a little bit because her kids aren't there. She is values driven. Now, this keeps coming up in everything that we're working on in a minute. So Margaret makes decisions based on practical value rather than tradition or emotion, and that is on the increase. Looking at the number of people who come in, the religious observance is certainly declining in certain areas, probably more so people who were kind of 50-50 about the concept of religion and attendance at church. It's that particular group of people are fading quite quickly and moving to alternate decisions when it comes to celebrations, whether it be a funeral or a wedding. She has experienced loss and understands that funeral arrangements should prioritise the needs of the living and not the adherence to convention. So it's not about her. It's very much about who she's leaving behind and what might be best for them. She is cost conscious, but not price driven. And this is what I keep coming back to about the value. Do they see the value in what they're spending money on? And that is something that is really important to keep in mind when you're starting to think about your price points, how you price your funerals, but also in your marketing as well. And so while Margaret is mindful of cost, she's not looking for the cheapest option. I do hear this quite a lot from members saying, should I put my direct cremation down to 999? And I think, okay, is that going to work for your business? And does that reflect the perception of your brand as a quality funeral director in your community, it's probably not going to work for you going to such an extreme. So it's worth thinking through and understanding more about what your community's perception of you actually is, while still wanting to serve that family. So again, she seeks value services to provide what's needed without unnecessary extras or emotional manipulation, which is quite a statement, but she just wants it done. So location independence, this was the key that brought us into the journey of understanding more about Margaret and the group of people that Margaret comes from. She's not bound by the idea that a funeral service must be local, and she is comfortable with the concept that care doesn't require a physical proximity. Her values are very much about efficiency and simplicity over traditional local connections. Family first mindset, and it's interesting reading the first couple of slides on this profile, is that there might be an assumption that there's a lack of care around family. It's actually a lack of care around location. Family actually is the most important thing in making sure, no matter where they are in the world, that they are her primary concern. And that is reducing the emotional and financial burden on her children. She wants it straightforward. She doesn't want them to have to make complex decisions during a difficult time. And so we are calling Margaret as a location agnostic funeral consumer, and it's 16.5% of the UK. That's how they think about funerals. It is about simplicity, it is about value, but adhering to a location specific service is not really a priority for them. They just want to get it done, and they want it as simple as possible at a price point that they think is worthwhile. And that is Margaret. So we didn't just stop there. We thought, okay, let's have a look at what kind of marketing messages resonate to this particular group of people. Because, as SAIF members, and independent funeral directors, our businesses are still here because we work hard for the families in our communities, and we are still trading. And there is an assumption naturally that we are good at what we do. And we communicate well with the people that we serve for traditional funerals, be it burial or cremation. So we started to have a look at messages that resonate for the 16.5% of people who are just like Margaret. And it is interesting that plan ahead to protect your family, simple, dignified, affordable, no hidden costs, no pressure, professional care wherever you need it, and focus on what matters most. These are not new ones to the market, but they're very much talking to Margaret and her group of people. And so what I would say to you is, if you're thinking about your next social media slide or your next brochure or your next presentation to your community, these are key messages to speak to people who are perhaps not as loyal to their traditional family funeral director or to location, but they certainly want to hear these messages from us, and that's something that we can provide, and I know that we can. Looking at the time, I am aware that it's question time, and so I think Terry's going to come back and join us. At least I think he is. Hi, Terry.
Hi, Dick. Thank you so much for that. That is a lot of information you've shared with us in the last 30 minutes. And I'm just curious, do viewers have any questions? Grateful for Susan's comments about the starting point that the online providers had. I think there's some real gems there about what we think are important compared to what the consumer thinks is important. And Declan's highlighted that in terms of one of the things I keep hearing is people want a simple and straightforward engagement process with arranging a funeral. And, I think that's something that Declan's talked about how we frame our conversations through our arrangers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Dec, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think we've seen such significant change in society, and we look at other countries. We look at what's happening. One of our most recent little pieces of research was on the culture of direct cremation in Japan. We've looked at Australia and Canada, and we thought, okay, let's start to look at how other countries operate. What's the feeling behind it? Direct cremation globally is on the rise, but it does only appeal to a certain amount of people. The adherence to tradition is not lost. at all. It's just that there is a certain group of people who it doesn't work for, and that's society in general. Everyone has different tastes and preferences. But what I would say is that if that's the one that's shifting the most, getting a little bit more of an understanding, and probably communicating that to your team is really important to do. And I would say, we have our rangers of different ages. We've got one in our 20s. We've got someone who's, I think, shortly celebrating her 65th. You've got a wide range of ages and different kind of demographics within that team. And they will have different approaches and different strengths to talk to different people who come in to see them. And you never know who that's going to be. So we have to be thorough when we really talk about this, and this is a presentation I will do with them as well, to show them, look, we are the assumption that funerals are pretty much the same, which they have been for decades, if not hundreds of years. They're changing more and have changed more in the last probably 6 or 7 years than anything in history. And we need to be on top of that. We need to be making sure that we are communicating and hitting the key touch points with people, because we do provide this service. It's just important to get that message out there.
Yeah. Well, we've got one question. Simon, thank you for the question. Do you think the larger groups will maintain their lead on the direct cremation option in the coming years or not?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say, okay, so the price point or the cost being advertised for direct cremation started very, very low, and it was never sustainable. It was never sustainable. It was a price war. It was there to get market share and then gradually over time come back up. And the goal of a price war is to wipe out the competition. But everybody has started to raise their prices step by step. And I think at one point, probably direct cremation price war essentially started in Glasgow, I think about seven years ago. And we had 799 was being advertised on billboards around the city, and over time that's now, well, almost double the price, because it's just not sustainable to do that. So I think what we're seeing is we're kind of coming towards the end of the price war section of it. As that happens, and again, big companies have shareholders, they want a return on their money, and typically for venture capital companies, it's anywhere from 3 to 7 years between investment and return. Things have to turn over. And what I would say is that Pure Cremation have a significant bank of funeral plans that could last them a long time, probably 10 years plus. But their owners will exit if they're not already in the process of exiting. And that model is, there's only so far you can go in that model. They spend over £25 million a year on television. Looking at what we know roughly what they do, is that sustainable? No, they'll have to change. They will have to change. It's I think we are incredibly flexible in terms of we can help families with any type of funeral. They can only help with one, and so either they change or I can't see them maintaining that market share in the at-need space without even greater investment, and that's not profitable. So what I would say is keep doing what we're all doing, and hang on, and I think we'll we will weather the end of the storm. Again, they will have to do something, so we'll keep an eye on them, as we always do.
Thank you, Dick. One question I'd have is the pre-need market. We know that funeral plans, 60% of those plans are now direct funerals. How does our marketing and our impact, our promotion, differ, if at all, between our at-need space of how we promote ourselves? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we're doing quite a bit of work on that at the moment. So obviously Golden Charter are our partners in the SAIF digital program, which is where the research takes place. I think everyone's still trying to figure that part out at the moment. I think first and foremost, communicate that you do sell funeral plans. It's amazing how many members do not do this. But I think there's an assumption where we're funeral directors, we're in the high street, obviously we sell funeral plans. And you think, no, that doesn't work. That's not quite how it works at all. So, yeah, I would, if your funeral plan company provides you with marketing materials, get them in the windows. Do get them in the windows. Utilize your social media. So I think one of the best questions we had at the very beginning of the Safe Digital program was, how often should I mention that we sell funeral plans? Is it 2 or 3 times a week? And I thought, no, not that often. But it is some great resources out there to help just communicate the fact that you do, because the details of that plan, that comes when they come in for a chat. So that's where you get to there. It's just make sure that people know you do direct cremation and you do provide funeral plans, and it's okay to be a little bit more creative. Probably 4 years ago when we started the program, everyone kind of looked the same. There wasn't really much colour involved in talking about funeral plans or at-need services. What we're starting to see is a real diversity of refreshing of funeral director brands and use of colour, and I think that's a good thing to do. I really do. I think it's okay to not maintain this Victorian-esque brand. It's okay to look at modern fonts, modern colours, and make sure you talk about what you do.
Great, that's really good. Before I forget, the research that we're doing for next year has just been launched, the survey. Would you like to plug that? Went out to members, I think, last week.
Yes, I think there's a number of pieces coming out. So we are currently doing, I'm just trying to think, I think that particular one was to do with funeral plans and sector. And so that has gone out to members by email. And again, it's also in the Safe Digital group on Facebook. It's incredibly important that that members get involved in this. And there's a number of reasons. One is internally, it helps our team understand where the market's going. It helps us know what relationships to work on in terms of partners, but also when we get up on stage, we don't just talk for the sake of it. There is research, there's data backing up what we're saying, and the strategies that we recommend that you take. And we have an incredible group of people who I never really thank enough, a combination of contractors and some volunteers who are outside the sector providing advice as to how we approach every piece of research that we do. And they do it for a reason, because this is a fantastic cause in terms of SAIF and the membership, is that protecting ourselves and each other. But research has to be part of that process too. And I will say the insights that we have come up with in the last 3 or 4 years, and will continue to, will give us the ability to provide you with support in many areas of your business. So please do contribute to it. And again, thank you to all those who have and continue to.
Great. Simon raised one question about resources, templates. That's something available on the SAIF digital Facebook as well as members area?
Yes, absolutely. So we did spend probably the first half of the period of Safe Digital focusing on templates and resources. There's a lot of things in the photo group, as well as every year we publish a list of social media calendar to tell people what's coming up. Again, we will do a little bit more towards the end of this year, just with some updated different ideas. Some focus on things like direct cremation, other things focus on the value of a local funeral director. There's some videos. There's also amazing resources on the members area on the SAIF website. But one of the things I always say is, if you've got a question or you've got a particular piece of creative thinking required when you're working on a piece, give us a shout. We monitor the Safe Digital page every single day, and more than happy to share something that we've seen other members do, or perhaps give you something from our own extensive library of creative thoughts and images.
And how do people sign up for that, Dick?
So if you go to the Safe Digital Facebook page, you can go in there and you can have a chat. There's everyone, Zoe posts everything. You just click on Zoe's name and have a chat on Messenger. Or if you email, I think it's been a while since I've quoted this, info@safedigital.co.uk with any questions. But either way, even if you call the Safe Business Centre and just say, I'd like some help from Safe Digital, I'll get the message, or Zoe will get the message fairly quickly.
Before we go, Kevin's just raised a question about how some independents are supporting national providers with removals, collections. What's our view on that?
Yeah, we don't like that. Yeah, I think it's, if I think from a marketing director perspective, and I sit and think, right, okay, well, I've got some budget today, and I want to throw, 600,000 into pay-per-click, but we can't do that if we don't have any service or kind of operational service or logistics service in an area. And I do think about certain parts of Wales, certainly Northern Ireland, Scotland, parts of England, that there's no regional hubs for these companies. But they find a local independent funeral director to do it for them. And the thing is, once they're in that area, they're only going to grow. They're only going to increase and really get their brand presence across. I thoroughly understand that small funeral businesses and some other kind of related companies, that's part of their survival. That's what they do. They need to do this in order to make ends meet. And it's a difficult place for them to be in. But if you've got a choice, I would actively encourage you to focus on growing your business elsewhere. And again, there's always opportunities to connect with other SAIF members, and we do that a great deal. Is connect, might be a repatriation company, and we connect them with other members in certain areas. That's what SAIF's there for. It's there for networking and growing your business by connecting with other funeral directors and associates. But I would say, I think a great deal of the kind of regional growth has been based upon certain companies helping them out, and at the end of the day, the cost will be much higher than what they've made.
Thank you for that, Dec. Totally agree. Final question. It's more about our posture at this time. A lot of independent leaders are quite tired. They're worried about the landscape. What word of hope and encouragement would you give them?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I can take Scotland as an example. As I said, we went through a price war a number of years ago, and it was worrying. It was very concerning. I'd just come back to the sector as this was starting to really bite. We had regulation on the horizon as well that nobody really knew what it was going to look like. It was a lot of unknown there, and it just felt for a lot of people that this was getting too much. What I will say is this, is the nature of what you do and how well you do it, that doesn't change, then keep going. There are always going to be changes in the market, and we will always be watching out for them and looking at the strategies behind how to deal with them or how to engage or change. And when it comes to regulation, if you are already a SAIF member, you don't have a huge amount to worry about. There's going to be changes. We had to make changes in Scotland in order to accommodate that, but the time was there to do it and to do it well with the support of the Mortuaries Committee and all the other the regulation readiness programme. I would say it's we can get past anything, we can, but I would definitely encourage you to listen to the great speakers that come up at education days and on webinars. You can get past this, and even then I think it's just about perception. It looks worse than it is. Just keep serving the families well, using the resources that we make available, and if you need help, there's a phone number, there's an email, there's a website, there's local meetings. Use them. And a brilliant example was 185 people turned up for Education Day in Leicester, which was typically half that, I think, some years ago, and it was undoubtedly one of the best atmospheres for sharing skills and knowledge and different types of approaches to things. I heard a number of discussions around people talking about where they get candles to leave by bedsides, and do you know what? It's just all about adding value. And I would say networking, not for the sense of chasing business, but for skill sharing and knowledge sharing in SAIF is probably the most unexpected thing I ever got from membership, I've got to say. So get involved in your local groups, attend meetings. There's much more. You'll go home with a lot more than you came with.
Yeah, thank you so much, Declan, for being with us today and the richness of sharing this data and information. To our members, our next meeting's on the 12th of November. We have Mirable, who are a values-based training company that President Ross Hickton is inviting them in. So we'll see you then. Thank you so much, Dec, for all you bring.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you all.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.